So it looks like we have most of Planning and Zoning Commission here and a few from Housing Commission with some crossover. So it is 6:02. Why don't we get started? And Marco, you are the chair, so you get to kind of run this meeting, and I'm kind of your backup agenda for staff to bring up the items.
Sounds great. Thank you, Hannah. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the joint meeting of the Housing and Planning and Zoning Commission for the City of Glenwood Springs. It is 6:02, like Hannah said. It is also October the 21st, 2020. And I think maybe we'll start with a roll call on Hannah's end, if you could do that, and then we'll do a quick introduction so we all know who's here.
Sure. So I'll start with P&Z. Sumner.
I am here.
Great. And if you could just state which commission you're on, and if you're on both. Sumner is on
both.
both for Sumner. Great. Carolyn?
Commissioner Carolyn Z.
Thank you. And George Shaver?
I'm on the P&Z, George Shaver, present.
Thank you. Catherine Grosscup?
Hi, Catherine Grosscup. I sit on both, and I have a question if I can be elevated on my cell phone into the meeting just for a temporary time. I have to drive.
Are you the 720? Taking care of that right now. Maybe. I'll work on that, Catherine, just a second. Marco?
I'm here, yes, Marco Dam, Planning and Zoning.
Amber Wissing is not present. Dean Kinkle, also
He
not
resigned.
present. Oh, that's why then. And from Housing Commission, Ellen Dole.
I'm here.
Steve Beckley.
I'm here.
Sean Nesbitt.
I'm here.
And we also have Linda Dupriest, as I mentioned, joining us. She's our transportation coordinator. Thank you for being here. As well as Terry Parch, engineering. Great.
And I also see two familiar council faces. If you want to introduce yourself quick, that'd be great.
I will roll call them as well. Paula?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Glad to be here.
City Council, and Shelley Kaup.
Yep, I'm here too. Here
Also,
mainly to listen tonight, but we'll answer questions.
thank you so much.
Okay.
All right.
Excellent.
Thanks,
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everybody. Before we get into this, I guess I forgot to mention the webinar ID, which is 867-3402-8053. And there's a passcode with it. And this is new for me. I've never seen a passcode, but it's 738067. I'm not sure, are we taking public comment or any input today? Or is this just being broadcast to watch?
It is a public meeting, so if we had people join that had questions, they could raise their hand and we could entertain that, but mostly work session for you guys.
Okay, so at that said, I will give them a phone number, which is 1-669-900-6833. And as Hannah just said, if you do have any questions later on in the evening, maybe you can call in and raise your hand, and we'll get to you as we go along here. So anyway, moving into our first agenda item, which is number 3 on the agenda, which is the housing goal decision. And Hannah, are you gonna lead into this and tell us, and then we can probably mess it up from there, but that sounds good.
Yep. And also I would like to ask you guys, if you don't mind, a little bit of a switch on the agenda. I believe it's listed as number 4, the action plans and recommendations. I would actually like to start with that. It's just kind of a shorter overview. And then we will move to that housing goals discussion. Does anyone object to that?
No, flexibility
Great.
is a good thing. So let's go.
Hearing none. And really I want this to be a lot of discussion, obviously, but I wanted to provide some documents that already exist. We've done a lot of plans and a lot of studies have been done. And so I wanted to make sure that you guys have, all of you, those recommendations that have been put forth, as well as the comprehensive plan. You'll see that there. I've listed the housing chapter, and also a document that some might not be familiar with that does exist is our strategic housing plan that is part of the comprehensive plan. But at the very top, the recreation economy for rural communities recommendations. So this was a very recent effort, and they actually produced a document. It's in draft form, so this is not finalized, still working on it. But they did come up with some action items after a work session with steering committees as well as the public, and affordable housing was one of those goals. So not sure if you guys had a chance to kind of look over it. It's one of the shorter documents. But so really what this section, and why I wanted to have it first, is to highlight we do have a lot of documents that have gone over these topics and identified recommendations, strategies, and there's a whole chapter in our comprehensive plan. And then the strategic housing plan as well identifies a list of priority strategies. That one is from 2010. And our comprehensive plan was most recently updated in 2014. So these are a little bit older, but still relevant, as these discussions have been around for some time. So quickly, I'll go over the recreation for rural economy. It's pretty brief, but they did have some suggestions that I think are worth kind of mentioning that came out of their work session. So goal 3, affordable housing. How can we support opportunities for housing in Glenwood Springs? And I think I'm going to share my screen so you guys can look at these at the same time. Can everyone see that? Great. So we're looking at goal 3, which is right here. How can we support opportunities for housing in Glenwood Springs that is affordable and accessible for all, including seasonal and permanent residents? So they came up with 3 action items. And the first, reach out to partners on affordable housing solutions, funding, and examples, and contact the Valley Housing Coalition. The second is propose policy and inclusionary zoning to allow more housing choices. And 3, the unicorn, create a revenue stream focused on deed restricted home ownership. And they go into, in the document that you guys have, they go into more specifics where they list measures of success and a time frame, lead roles, and resources. So I did just want to highlight that this is the most recent effort that included public involvement and steering committee, where they came up with some recommendations on moving forward. Any questions about these?
Wouldn't 2.1 and 2.2 also apply to this workshop?
Scrolling back. You are absolutely correct. Sumner has pointed out the economic diversification goal. And in that, they have developed a plan to encourage deed restricted affordable housing for workers, including service workers, and identifying barriers in the zoning code for economic diversification and work to minimize them. This, like I said, this is a work in progress. They just had a meeting today and they're going to be filling this out more, but I wanted to call your attention just to efforts that are ongoing and the same type of recommendations that come up. So the comprehensive plan is a lengthy document. I'm just going to pull out the strategic housing plan here on my screen and focus just in the index here on their priority strategies. And you guys probably recognize a lot of these. We've talked about quite a few, but they have public-private development on city land, rehabilitation and weatherization, which is one that hasn't come up too much for us, commercial linkage, housing funding strategies, inclusionary zoning amendments, development incentives, and annexation policy. And they also include some projected results with the combined strategies. So really all of this is to say, we don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel tonight. We do have a lot of documents that we can refer back to where work has been done, studies have been concluded, and it already exists. So that was really what this section was about. Is there any questions or any discussion that you guys want to have around what's in these documents or how these documents are used or anything relating to this?
And if you guys could please raise your hand, that would be great. Then we have some sort of a clean kind of talking going on. So if you have any questions, how do you want to do this? Do you want to talk about what you just said and then keep going after we talk about it? Or do you want to present everything and then we just kind of, because it looks to me like some goes with one or the other of the next agenda items. It's kind of all like a big ball here of thread.
It's a good way to describe it. I think maybe best to see if anyone has questions about these particular items right now, and then we can move along after that and kind of refer back to them if we want to when we're talking about different strategies. So I do see a couple of hands up.
Yes.
If you don't mind. Marco, do you see the hands as well?
I do.
Okay, go ahead then.
I'm going to call on Commissioner Schachter, please.
Unmute.
As always, I've got a kind of a top-down, bottom-up question. I mean, the housing, there are like 31 strategies, 39 strategies possibly listed in the housing proposal. I kind of went through that. I really like the community action plan because it has strategies and goals and accountability. And I've kind of made a list of things we've already done and we are doing. But again, my question is, Hannah, and maybe back to Shelley and Paula, all these ideas, I'm still not sure how to drive this thing. We've been going through many of these things and we process them and some of them move up to you. Now we have 3 documents we're looking at, one recent one that gives certain actions. I guess my question is, who does the prioritizing? I prefer to see it from the top down, but I've had mixed messages. Oh, you guys pick one and force it up and see what happens, as opposed to we don't have unlimited time or resources. Who sets the priorities? Because it can't all be done at once. And that's my question.
Okay, Shelley, please.
Sure. And Sumner, I'll speak to this just a little bit. I think the council is interested in ideas and recommendations from these 2 commissions. We like the idea and the concept moving forward with Housing Commission to get a project developed. We had a conflict with the housing meeting on Monday, so I'm not sure if that was talked about, and moved along, but hopefully it is moving along. Council supports that. But the other conversations that I've had with the mayor, and Paula can chime in on this too, is we did the new code adoption, and a couple of years ago, the former council decided to get rid of our deed restricted for sale housing. So that's not something that I supported, but I also recognized after we had gone through the recession that that was a tool that wasn't perhaps working well due to the economic recovery or the economic downturn. So I guess we're looking for, particularly involving P&Z, what type of regulations can we put on? I look at density bonuses. We have these large apartment complexes being built, and all we have on the books is a voluntary program to get some rents in those developments that are reasonable. And they may be market rate, but they're high. They're not really workforce rental. So I'm interested in seeing code changes, or either whether it's the form of an incentive built into our code, or whether it's in the form of a mandatory X percentage of the development needs to be, at a workforce level of rate. We're not seeing a ton of for sale housing. So whether or not we want to spend the time to go back and bring back in a deed restriction program on that type of housing, I guess I'd leave that. I'd love recommendations from this board, or both of these boards. So that's the kind of thing I'm interested in. We've also seen things across the country where some cities have gotten rid of their single family zone districts. And we've kind of done that in a way because we've allowed ADUs everywhere. So the question is, and again, our mayor has brought this up a couple of times, do we want to take that further? Would that benefit the city? So, and if there's other mechanisms, again, like Hannah said, we have a lot of good documents and plans. Are there things we can pull out of that? What we don't have is, we don't really have those on the books as actionable items that we're implementing right now.
Well, one of my, what related to this, Shelley, and maybe Paul step up, all of this implies, and we're going back now to 2010 and prior, all this implies that we know there's a need, but all this implies is there is a desire for a lot more housing units in Glenwood. Now, is that one thing I believe it would help me as a commissioner to have that articulated very clearly from the top down. Yes, we want a lot more units, and I'm not sure the community has weighed in on that in a long time. So that's one. Do we want a lot more units without quantifying it? And the other thing that seems to, and I'll be quiet, that underlies all this, other than a couple code changes here and there, inclusionary housing, deed restriction, and incentives for the developer, and different kinds of density. Those are 4 common elements that underlie all this. So if we want more housing units, we have to probably deal with some combination of those 4 things. Are there any of those, again, Shelley, is inclusionary housing on the table or off the table? I couldn't even tell from what you said. You see what I mean?
Well, I think with this council, it would be on the table.
Okay, all right.
If we can find a model that possibly works better. That, as far as, do we want more housing? Do we not want more housing? I could tell you what my personal views are, but I also feel like, in a way, the market's driving that. And if you talk to anybody who's in the real estate industry right now, the market is driving that. And we don't know what will come around the corner if we have another recession, or who knows what's going to happen at this point after this year. But what can council do? I don't know that council we've never discussed, and we're not in a position to say, no, we're closing the gates. No more housing in Glenwood, because we don't really have a way to do that. And I don't even know if it's possible, because that would just drive more development up 4 Mile, which is more sprawl, which is not an efficient and smart way to grow. So people can say they don't want more housing here, but we could stop building housing here and our traffic's only going to get worse,
Right.
because
Oh, I-
everybody's going to build towards Newcastle and Sultan Rifle and drive into Glenwood. So
I agree. I don't know that we had a community discussion, but something you just said, what the market is not driving and hasn't driven for over a decade and probably won't drive in the future is the very housing that all these documents say we need.
so that's what we're trying to work on.
More deeded, more affordable, more senior, more workforce.
At least some percentage of that. Yeah.
The market's not driving that. So if we want it, we have to, I assume.
Right. And if we get to a point where the market's not driving housing, then not much is going to get built. And that's what we saw in, 08 or 09 through 2010, 2011, when things started picking up, but it took a while for the pricing to catch up again. So we can't control those things.
Well, I would like to add to that, to this conversation, Sumner, is, in all these discussions that I've been a part of, sitting in with Housing Commission and sitting in City Council and going through some of the approvals that we've done in the last year or so, I'm going to go back and reiterate what Shelley said, is it would be great to have the conversations, to have those 4 items included and really have some parameters, so that when people come to us and say, I'm going to build 90 units or 100 units, or what I'm hearing right now, rumors of the 400 units over in and not even in the city limits of Glenwood, that we find a way that when people are asking for variances and that type of stuff, that our code really allows for us to address some of these strategic housing plans that have been around since 2010, 2011, without just going, okay, we're going to do this little tiny thing to accommodate what it says in that code. And then we get to do what we want. And I feel like that needs to be addressed. And those are the kind of things that, if we really want to be serious about this, and I get the feeling from talking to people in these 2 groups that we are serious about it. We want these opportunities for our families to live here. And when Shelley mentions traffic, if we don't have opportunities for people to live here, traffic congestion is going to happen. So this is all tied together with, so I'm really glad to see that Linda is here. But from my perspective, and again, it's I want to be clear on that. I do feel like I'm glad to see planning and zoning here, because I do think it's a code thing. It's something that we've got to look at. And I know before I came on board as a city council person, you guys completely redid the code, but we still have some missing parts in it. So it would be great to see us address that.
And can I make one more comment? Just and not here, I don't want to go backwards, right? But we did have, before we did this latest code adoption and before we lost our deed restricted element of housing that was in the code, we had some things like density bonuses and height bonuses and things that were built in. We lost all those. And if nothing else, I'd like to get those back and see them applied not just to for sale type housing, but to apartment multifamily dwelling projects. So that's might be a starting place, but.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for all the input. Sumner, are you good at this point?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Dole, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to unmute myself. I had just a basic question to Hannah about the document that you presented on the rural economy. It's not something that I'm familiar with, and I was wondering who's a part of that group that's putting together those recommendations, and just some background to put it in context for me, because what they had to say was very relevant to what's going on.
That's a great question, Ellen. And I was on the steering committee very briefly and then got sidetracked with a little fire in the canyon. So I am going to hand this off possibly to Jen. Paula is also on that steering committee. So either of them could probably give a better debrief on the RERC process and some background information. Any takers on that, Jen?
Sure. We applied for and got some technical assistance from the EPA, and the focus of the effort was really related to tying the Hanging Lake shuttle and that effort into downtown. So that was kind of the idea of what the technical assistance was related to. But you know, as we know, all of these, what did we call it earlier, a ball of twine or whatever. So kind of every tendril touches every other tendril. So the recommendations were primarily in service to kind of recreation economy, but there are also pieces of that related to affordable housing and also inclusion and equity, particularly around our Latinx community. So if you look at all of those recommendations, that's where that came from. And there were folks who represented a lot of recreation kind of users. We had the Forest Service, so they were a partner with us when we applied for the technical assistance, and Ken Murphy from the H2O Ventures. And Paula, I'm sure you have other things you'd like to add.
Was this a technical grant that could lead to further funding? I know some agencies, the one I used to work for, used to have technical planning grants, and if you went through a certain spot, you could then be eligible for more developmental type of grants. And is there anything related with that with the EPA?
You know, I think that it's always, you're talking to some of these folks who have other grant opportunities, so it's not kind of a direct pipeline, but there were lots of recommendations that came out of that for other ideas of ways and other programs at the state, and then also kind of on the federal level. But I don't think that there was a specific EPA implementation kind of technical assistance or implementation. And this is the third project that we've worked on with the EPA. So the first was the area-wide planning effort that we have for the Confluence, formerly known as the Confluence, now known as the 8th Street Crossing Development. And so that was a $200,000 grant that we got from EPA. And then we had technical assistance with them after that to do some park planning, initial kind of high-level park planning for that area along the Roaring Forks. This is the third technical assistance that we've had with the EPA.
And what's the final product supposed to be that you do?
So it'll look very similar to the draft that you have. It just will have all of the items filled out.
Okay. I was just, wondering, sometimes you can use it for implementation programs with different agencies, and was wondering if that was an option for us here as well. Okay. Just because some of the discussion you have on the housing is similar to what the Housing Commission has been talking about, and now sort of being given a go-ahead from City Council to come up with some specific plans with respect to city-owned land for housing development, for developing some projects. So I was trying to figure out how we could integrate what you're doing in that with the discussions that the Housing Commission is having.
And really, Ellen, that's what the plan is this was a community discussion, and then we go back to the Housing Commission and other places. When we were talking with Brian Smith today on the recreation side, he had already talked about how that they had meetings with Parks and Recreation on some of the topics that they were involved in. So yes, it is meant to tie this back to you.
Well, particularly, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. Particularly since right now the Housing Commission is trying to identify partners to talk about, to learn lessons from, to reach out. And I was interested to see in that particular document, it identified a variety of potential organizations to reach out to that we really hadn't really focused on before in dealing with the Aspen Land Trust, I think, and the USDA and some other groups. So I was thinking that we needed to be incorporating that into some of those next steps that the Housing Commission wants to take.
Yes, consider yourself all in.
All right, thank you, Marco. That was some questions that I had about just some additional background there.
Very informative, thank you. Any other questions about the first few items Hannah presented? If not, I think we'll keep going. And if questions arise, please raise your hand. I am not able to lower your hand, but I can see when it's up. So Hannah, if you could, there you go. Thank you, Hannah. We'll get through it that way, and then we'll have a discussion. I think we'll just go wildly at it because I really think this all goes hand in hand with everything. So Hannah.
Great. Thank you, Marco. So our housing goals discussion was the next topic, and there's two, A and B there, about density and scale and type of housing products. So we really wanted to have a discussion a little bit on the feelings and opinion side and get at what you as the commissions want to actually see here to get a better idea. So I do have a poll for you, and bear with me, this is my first time doing a poll on Zoom. So I'm going to launch this poll, and you've got some multiple choice questions to fill out. And then we'll be able to see, this is a way that everyone can answer the question. So everyone gets some time here, and we can see kind of the results of where you guys fall on these topics. So I'm going to launch this and give you guys some time to look over this. The first question is, what scale of housing do you think Glenwood Springs needs more of? This is multiple choice. So we've got single family housing listed. Duplex is in its own category, triplex and fourplex. And then I've also included categories with number of units. These are estimates. So townhouses with 5 to 7 units, what I've called low-rise apartment complex in the 10 to 20 unit range, mid-rise apartments in the 20 to 50 unit range, and then we get into a much larger category of high-rise apartments. This probably might not be considered high-rise in other areas, but for us, up to 200 units and beyond, really. All of the above and none of the above. So really what this is asking is, you know, what would you like to see, or what do you think is needed? So I'll give you guys some time to fill that out. And then the second question, you can scroll down, is the type of housing, which we've listed: for sale product, rental product, or both.
Hannah,
Yes.
excuse me, but it says at the bottom, it says host and panelists can't vote. I think most of us are panelists, so can people vote?
Are.
Maybe it just...
And like I said, this is my first time doing this, and there is on the host side, let me see if I'm still, Jen, if you happen to be in the actual Zoom webinar, I believe there is a button where you click that allows panelists to vote. Bear with me for a moment.
I do not see what you're talking about.
One
I
second.
wonder if I have to take it down to do it.
Maybe. Fun technology. I'm going to click end polling, guys. We're going to get this figured out. 1 second, because we can relaunch it in a moment. You just think about your answers. You give it a lot of thought.
I definitely am not seeing that as so.
Edit. Yeah, in my instructions, it says click allow panelists to vote, but it doesn't say where that actually ends up. Let me see again. Yeah, I don't seem to have that option anywhere.
Maybe people can talk about the answers, and then I will let me do some investigation.
Either that or we keep going and then we'll fall back on the poll.
That sounds like a plan. So really the objective here was to get you guys, we feel like we haven't had a concrete discussion. And, you know, Shelley had mentioned before, like, I can tell you my opinion of what I think Glenwood needs. But that hasn't really been fleshed out too much in our commissions or at city council or in planning and zoning in staff's opinion. So we were trying to get to that question of, what do you want to see? Because if Housing Commission or P&Z is working towards something that is ultimately not going to be approved, or people don't actually want to see that product, then we've wasted some valuable time. So do people feel like they know they have an answer to those questions? Do you guys have specific desires? I see some head nodding.
Lots of them, lots of desires.
Carolyn, I see your hand. I'll go ahead and call on you.
Thanks. Yeah, I was about to answer your poll. I was going to click on everything except the really high density, like large apartment complexes, in part because now we have some of those. And it seems like everything else across the board, especially sort of entry level purchase, is needed. And I noticed one kind of category missing on there is housing for people with really no money. For example, our homeless folks, and perhaps there's some way we can rally them into our conversation somehow. But the impression that I get from just speaking with, you know, neighbors and things is that folks don't want to see a whole lot of huge urban kind of apartment buildings here, but things on a townhouse, duplex, and smaller scale seem to be pretty well supported, and especially infill development, downtown, ADUs, and perhaps more density. That's my take on it.
Thank you, Carolyn. I'm getting notification that Jen has solved my issue. Let's see if you guys can vote now.
I can't seem to vote, but that's okay.
Hey, Marco, this is Gretchen. I can vote for you if you tell me what you want.
Oh no, all in the open, I have to tell you?
I think it's because I made you a co-host, so
That's
it's
fine, it's fine.
I can unmake you a co-host, and then we can do it again when you're looking.
No, I'll tell Gretchen. Gretchen, you can vote for me.
Okay, what is it?
Number 2 is both for sale and rent. A little more emphasis on the rental, but I can't choose that. And on the number 1, I'd go for triplex, fourplex, townhouses, and low rise.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did everybody vote?
Not quite yet.
Okay.
We've got 66% response. Anyone that hasn't voted?
I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be voting, but I can't. So I'm just sharing that. I mean, I can't literally submit.
Okay. I think that's because you came in on the attendee side, Paula. My apologies.
While we're waiting to vote, can I add one thing? One thing we got to be concerned about is it's easy to say we need all these things and we need to, put ways to incent people to do stuff. But the truth of the matter is it's really difficult to make the economics work on building anything in Glenwood right now. So if you have developers add an additional fee to cover employee or housing costs, it's just going to drive away development. And right now, if you can do something for $250 a square foot to build it, excluding land, you're lucky. And so, none of that's affordable. Just with the building costs and the labor cost, it's really tough to make the numbers work in a development.
And hey, Hannah, can I just add something? Steve, can you talk a bit about the difference of construction costs when you get above a certain level? I remember from your caverns development, the building height actually, once you get above 3 stories, the construction costs start going way up. Is that correct?
That's correct. Actually, it's probably 4 stories. Once you get above 4 stories, it adds a lot more complexity to your construction, and so costs go up. You actually drive your per square foot cost down as you build the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floor, but as you go up to a 5th, 6th floor, you start having to get cranes and other things that add a lot of complexity. And plus, all of a sudden, our fire department may not have the right equipment to get to upper levels and stuff. So 4 floors, maybe 5 floors is reasonable, but 4 floors certainly is probably the sweet spot.
Steve, and that's a great point to bring up, as we're discussing, what we would like to see. Market is also going to have a say here in what is going to be provided. We can't necessarily dictate. So I'm going to share the results from this poll here. So on our first question in regards to scale, looks like we fell predominantly right in the middle, with triplexes and up to the little bit more dense townhouses. So predictably, you see lower voting on the edges, and then we've got this middle range right here where you guys seem to fall mostly in that 3 to 7 unit category. And scrolling down to 100% on both. Okay, that's great. Not anything specific there. Going to put that away.
Can I ask a question of Steve quick? Sorry, Hannah, I might.
No, go right ahead.
That's something you were going into. Just quickly on your vein of thought, Steve, and anyone else can chime in too. If I understand it, putting demands on developers certainly is going to just add cost and makes it harder to develop a project. Are there particular incentives that can help to balance that up, whether it's a height bonus or a density bonus or some other thing that we might, combine to reach more of a balance? Just a thought or a question on that.
I think we haven't given it enough time yet, but we took advantage of the deed restriction 81601 concept where we had all of our fees waived. And Hannah, I think those ended up being what, or Gretchen, maybe you could answer. I think it's like $18,000 to $20,000 a unit that were waived. So that on a 800, 900 square foot unit, that's a substantial savings in square foot cost by eliminating those. And then we had to commit that only people that worked in 81601 were going to live in those. And with that, it helped our construction costs to be lowered to where it's still not going to be what I consider affordable. I think we're going to be in the $1,600 a month range for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath unit. But compared to $2,400, $2,500 for the new apartments across the way, we're more reasonable.
And I just want to add to that. You guys may recollect the small little 4-plex unit on Blake Avenue that was planned, and that was the exact same math that we had to do. If we wouldn't been able to sign up for the 30-year program to have those fees waived, we couldn't build it. So that's why we didn't build it. that density bonus, which in our case would have been a ADU per duplex. Basically, that's what it comes down to, would have made a big difference. And for us to sign up for a 30-year plan, even without being able to get out of it, wouldn't have been a problem whatsoever. So I think this is a large component of what we're talking about here tonight, with the either additional ADUs or ADUs for duplexes, or in addition the 30-year fee waiver program for 8016 whatever we are, 81601 zip code residents. I think that has some teeth in all of this. So, Hannah, can't hear you.
Carolyn, did I forget to lower your hand? Okay, you lowered your hand. And Sumner?
Thank you. I think Marco and Steve point out maybe the obvious to all of us that let's say we use 250 as a baseline per square foot, whether it be rental or ownership, and I think we do need both. It's clear. It's only, we can get inclusionary housing one way or another if we combine those elements. We combine the fee waivers, we combine the density, we bonus, and we change some setbacks where necessary, and we're starting to get into at least affordable rental or affordable purchase at $400,000, which sounds ridiculous, but there at least you're getting into a zone. And so it's, if we want it, we're going to have to combine them somehow.
And
I think both Mark and Steve's examples make that patently clear.
And just to double up, and 250 is lucky if you get there.
Yeah,
that's
we need a little market adjustment to get there.
Yeah, you do.
One thing that is this program, the deed restricted program, is only for rental units. So if there was a way to come up with a way to do deed restriction and have some kind of a price adjustment with CPI or something like that, where you could sell a house, but then but they have to live in, a one that we could actually sell product, but keep them deed restricted or keep them where they're have to work in the community. I don't know if that's possible, but I know some smart people like you could figure it out how to make it work. So
doesn't Aspen do that with the blue roofs or the back 40, where it is all deed restricted and you can only increase 3% or something?
Yeah,
I'm sure there's a program out there we could copy or modify to fit.
and are we also not examining, I don't know how much difference in cost per square foot, Steve and Marco, but a manufactured or tiny home or prefab homes to put on some of these lots? I don't know how much that dramatically cuts costs or not, but it sure can affect density and other bonuses. And we really don't have many provisions for that, I don't think, in the code right now.
Just real quick, I just saw an ad today for a tiny home, the ones in Silt that are going up near the KOA.
Yes.
I think it's 675 square feet at 130,000, and you don't own the land. So you're looking at about 193 a square foot. So you're well below 250, but you get a 60-year lease.
60-year lease and a pretty expensive cost, but
pretty expensive still.
But that doesn't preclude those kind of units in some way, shape, or form, right?
And you only get 675 square feet, which for two people could possibly work, but I'm not sure that's the affordable housing we're after. I'm not sure. Ellen, please.
I'm sorry, I couldn't find where I could raise the hand on the screen, so I had to raise it. One of the things, though, that struck me when I was reading over these documents before the meeting today is, particularly if we want to do, people working in the community, living in the community, is stressing the need for family housing. rather than just, like Steve, I think your focus was on the workforce, not family in terms of, and the tiny homes don't necessarily are great, but they don't necessarily work for long-term living for a family or a family that's, growing over time. So I think that to me is a really important feature for people and to have with the transportation issues. So you can have families living in a community, going to school, working here. And that was one of the things that was tricky on your list when you were talking about single family homes. And there was not a price related to, we've got lots of single family homes in Glenwood that are a wide range of prices. And my focus was on the single family home, was really on the more affordable single family home that would meet the needs of families that are growing, that fall with under a lot of the things that were identified in the different housing plans that we have. And so I think that you have some stress going on here between the desire to be able to have, with under that 250 square foot cost, things that would be affordable. But I think we also need to make sure we're talking about affordability for families and not just affordabilities for individuals who can share a unit. So I just want to throw that out there as something that we can think about, even though we're trying to focus on being economical. We have to figure out a way, is there a way to deal with it so we can deal with the family issue needs for the community?
Okay, great. Any other questions or comments? Or Hannah, would you want to continue? Oh, Steve, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how to raise my hand on the thing. I don't see a raise hand button.
It's bottom right.
Anyway, I'll look for it. I think that where Summer was going was possible. We did look at some modular building where we could there's companies that will actually take your design, you have it engineered to be a modular. So we were looking at apartments or hotels, and those work if you have about 80 units that the price starts maybe helping. It does help on your cost of money because you can put these things up about in half the time. So that helps a little bit. But, one thing that might be able to look at is more a modular, buildings that are actually built by some of the ones that are maybe a step or two above a mobile home, something that looks nice. And there's some of them I've looked at that are really quite nice and have pop-up roofs and gables and they don't look so much modular, but you can get them. The products are coming out are quite nice, and you can buy these units for a couple $100,000, and they're 2,500 square feet, and you put them on a piece of land, and they work really good. But I don't think there's much incentive to do that, or I don't think I think we have to get past some maybe perception of modular housing.
I have actually, not that it matters, but I have actually priced a 2-story addition on a building downtown a few years ago with those modular units. We were going to crane them in and put them on top of the building. We would have had to close Cooper and Blake, but it would have worked. It was because we went up a couple of stories. It was, expensive again. But if you could just plop it on a piece of land from the ground up, it's probably not a bad deal, actually. So that said, should we allow different kind of housing styles? Because I don't know if we currently do in certain zones. Should we allow these kind of things for ADUs? Can that happen in a backyard where you basically buy it and they truck it in and they crane it in your backyard? Is that an affordable thing to do?
If you can find them that meet code and certain design standards, then there'd be no reason not to.
I think they're all building code ready. They have to be. Otherwise, these people wouldn't be in business, I would think. But I don't know if we allow that as an ADU.
Just
Okay.
to answer that question, Marco,
Yeah.
you know, we've gone through manufactured homes, not as ADU specific that I can recall, but we have had manufactured homes come in single family unit. It takes a little bit extra work sometimes for them to meet our design standards specifically. Building codes, yes, wasn't so much of an issue there, but took a little bit of work to make sure that they meet those design standards of our code. But I would think that same thing could work for an ADU.
Okay. And sorry, I went out on a tangent. I didn't really mean to talk about building styles because we're still trying to figure out what direction should we attack here to maybe actually have some actions out of this so we can move forward. Anyway, I see some hands. We got Paula.
Steve, on your discussion of the cost, and I understand what you're saying at $250 a square foot, but some of these opportunities like the 8th Street crossing, or if we potentially do something at the airport, means city land is involved. And if we develop the right partnerships or the right developer, that, you know, the land doesn't become part of the cost, so that we can have a area of wherever that development is put towards deed restricted housing or that type of thing. Is that going to make a difference there? And is it something where, you know, we have a partnership, say, with the school or the hospital, and we say, look, we're going to provide the land, you build 20 units and make, you know, half of them open to the public, anyone in 81601, and then you can use 10 for your employees. I mean, is there that kind of opportunity that kind of offers a doorway to mitigating those costs a bit?
Right now, at that 250 a square foot is without land. That's
Okay.
how astronomical the prices are right now. They're really, really tough. Material prices are through the roof, and of course, our labor costs are. You know, when we have such a cyclical economy, and we lose a lot of our tradesmen, and a lot of people don't want to go into the trades. The trades are being paid really well right now. So it's really hard to build. I think we did our project at the CDOT. We got it signed before the prices of materials went up. We're at about $210 a square foot excluding land, and you know, 1 floor of office and 2 floors of 19 employee housing units that are about 900 square foot each. So so we kept the cost below 220, but it's still, I think right now, if I bid it right now, it'd be 250.
Okay, and Carolyn?
Thanks. I was actually glad to hear some conversation about different building technologies and stuff that might be available to us, but we're not really considering. And things about the prefabricated tiny houses. Right now, our minimum size ADU is 300 square feet. And perhaps if, as the P&Z Commission, we were to lower that minimum, we could be allowing more prefabricated tiny houses to be basically placed in yards. Now, tiny houses don't necessarily meet building codes because a lot of them are classified as RVs. But that brings me to our next conversation of prefab, modular, and or SIPS panels, buildings that can be brought and assembled on site, and a whole lot of other building technology that I don't know if our building department is familiar or comfortable with. I know that Garfield County passed the tiny house amendment. I don't know if we as the city have, I'm sure someone can comment on that. But that ties in with our kind of environmental sustainability conversation, which came up in just about all of these documents. And maybe we should, I guess, encourage slightly alternative building methods and look into tiny houses and sort of see if other communities might have done the same things. If we make exemptions for innovation and construction and design and perhaps even things that could lower those pretty high building costs. Thanks.
Thank you. Catherine?
Thank you. Well, I appreciate how hard this is. So I don't know if I can solve it in a moment here, but I have two thoughts of things that I've heard of that are kind of innovative in the housing world in the last year or so. One is that Colorado is receiving a factory indie dwell in Pueblo. They've opened their doors, and Hannah, I gave you some info, but there's a lot of excitement about this company that will do modular construction, but they offer the ability to use shipping containers, which are actually very, very energy efficient. They can design them very well. And I've seen a tour actually, which they're compelling and they really interrupt on the cost side. So that's one thing to keep in mind. They can really, they can be assembled in different ways. So they can do 3-story walk-up, they can do different models, but it really can be something on the cost side. So that's coming to Colorado and a neat innovation. And then the other program that I think has been moving along the I-70 corridor is it's called the Vail Indeed. It started in Vail. Avon's looking at it. I think it's kind of going through other resort communities. It takes investment from the municipal side, but it's basically a voluntary entrance of sellers of property into a program that benefits the idea of keeping people in town, the important workers. So you can actually get a lot of return for the investment easier than you could on a construction side. It has to be managed and you can restrict it in different ways, but the concept really is, how do you develop an inventory of housing that would benefit either an 81601 or a workforce in your community, so they have access, and it kind of creates a third model of ownership. It does take investment, so assembling that kind of fortitude is hard. Vail has big resources, Avon has big resources, but it's being deployed, and it doesn't take a whole lot of money even to get a few units. So it might be a little smarter sometimes than maybe an IZ, where we got 7 over, 10 years. And it's always kind of dependent on other developers and their economics. So it's not a way to get to a win quickly.
So that said, I have to ask council something quick, and I've been on the P&Z for a while, so I've seen a few councils come and go, but this is the first time I actually heard that you guys might be interested in a public-private partnership, because I've heard previous councils say we're not in the real estate business, in which I thought very close-minded, but I like to hear that you guys are maybe thinking there's land and we should build on it. I'm still not sure the word affordable is going to work, but maybe attainable is a better term. So anyway, just a quick question.
Yep. What was the question? I'm sorry.
That's okay. I say a lot of nothing. So.
Well, no, I just was listening for the question. Was it about whether or not we're open to a public-private partnership?
Yes, because it's the first time I heard council actually say that out loud.
Okay. Yes, we are very interested in that. We're not exactly sure what the model will be and how it will work. And I think that's something Housing Commission is going to work with staff on and talk to different potential partners. But yeah, we're interested in exploring that.
Because what I'm thinking is if that is the case, then, and this goes back to Sumner a little bit, is he's looking for direction from the top. I'm thinking we should just compile what we can come up with, including these kind of things, because when it comes to maybe public-private partnership, that the zoning for those lots is rather important on whether we just ditch the single family altogether. Do we allow extra ADUs on it? Because it comes down to, you guys are up in the land, we want to make the most of it. So how much do we want to fill these kind of developments? And I'm just throwing this out there for the Planning and Zoning Commission to think about zoning for certain land after the Housing Commission has figured out where it should go, that we can make this as economical as possible and as effective as possible.
And we are, Marco, I don't know if the planning and zoning is fully up to date, but commission, with the permission of council, is going ahead now pursuing what we've called an actionable item, pursuing 2 city parcels. And we're going to seek partnerships and requests for information to see what kind of housing, how dense it can be, how and what kind of restrictions. And then do we need zoning variances or changes? We don't know yet, but we are pursuing it fairly aggressively for a commission.
So in the near future, we could see something to talk about.
We
That'd
hope
be
so.
Fantastic, right. Okay, any other comments, questions? No, then back to Hannah.
Great. So now we kind of get to the meat of this and talking about housing policies. And you guys have mentioned a lot so far. And so this is by no means limited to these 3 that I put up here, but they're ones that we have discussed before. And one kind of that I see is maybe quicker, the deed restricted fee waiver program. So this is the program that Steve Beckley was talking about that he is utilizing for his current project, wherein the property developers agree to restrict and this is for rent, restrict the rent to 100% AMI averaged over the units that are in the program, and receive all of our system improvement fees waived by unit. So that can go up to roughly $21,000 per unit in fees waived on the development permit side. So this was put into effect in 2018. And so it's been going for a couple years. We're coming up on our 3rd reporting year, 2.5, if you want to be more precise. And it's come up a couple times on maybe we need to review the project in how it's going and possible tweaks and see if it's achieving the intentions and goals. So I looked at numbers that I had when I was still in community development. So Gretchen, if these are incorrect, or if someone has joined the program since I've been gone, please let me know. But we're sitting at approximately 26 units that are in this program that have come online over the last 2.5 years. And Steve, I'm not including yours in that, so that number is incorrect. Steve, can you remind me how many are in your project?
There's 19 total units and 15 of them are deed restricted.
Okay, so Steve's project added quite a bit to the program.
Yeah, and Hannah, this is Gretchen. I've got maybe a couple more other units that have been added as well.
Okay, so 26 plus 15 plus a couple more. Thanks for that, Gretchen. So we, on the staff level, and Gretchen and Jen can jump in on this as well, when we have discussions with developers and when we roll this out as an option, sometimes it works great in Steve's case where this is meant for his employees that do already work in 81601. That matches up perfectly. So not a huge inconvenience there to try and track that. With some of our larger developers, it hasn't quite penned out to have that restriction in place, that it's only that they can only house people who work in 81601. So really this is about bringing up how the program's going, how many units we've added. I think it's worked well. And Steve, if you want to discuss more about how that's working for your project, I think you touched on it a little bit. But we've also had some people that have left the program as well. So we had 2 that left roughly within a year of being in the program, a 4-unit complex, and then 1 that was just a standalone unit. So there's been some discussion on how that works. And when someone exits the program, whether there's a penalty or how easy it is. and discussion around, well, is this just a short-term loan that's not really meeting intentions, or is this functioning as desired? So Housing Commission spoke about this briefly, and we did talk about some ideas regarding an exit penalty or a minimum time that you have to be in before exiting the program. Also discussions around if you do exit early, there's currently no interest that's applied. So when you exit the program, you are paying the remainder of what's left on those fees, but not with an interest unless you fail to pay them within a timely manner. Then an interest is accrued. So I guess I'll start the discussion there and see. This is more discussion. It's not really an action item, but it is something that staff could bring back with an actual action item. I believe that would go to Planning and Zoning Commission first if we want to alter that program in any way, or your thoughts on how you think it's going.
Sumner, you want to start?
Well, given that we have this many units, it's somewhat of a success. I mean, it seems clear you need quite a few units to make it work for the savings, but if we're truly after building an inventory of workforce or affordable, whatever you want to call it, this is 100% AMI, I believe, average. I would push for no exit. You're in for 30 years at least, and there is no abeyance. Would be maybe that's extreme, but I'd start there if what we're interested in is creating that housing and preserving it.
So that said, I have to ask Steve, would that have changed your mind in doing 15 units? I'm just curious.
So just a couple of real quick economics that we should just talk about. Let's say the going market rate for the lofts right now is $2,500 a month for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath unit. And we're going to rent our units for, let's say, $1,700 a month. So we're taking an $800 a month hit on this, and we're going to save about $18,000. That's less. So, you know, you really have to want to do this because it's about a 2-year payout to put it back at the market rates, you know. So I don't know if, you know, some developers probably wouldn't want to do this program anyway, because it's not, there's not a lot of incentives you can make a lot more money keeping it at market rate right now. That's the only thing I would have to add to that.
Anna, I see you waving, so I'm gonna call on you.
Thanks. I just wanted to note that there is a prohibition on mandating rent control. So you want to make sure if there are any limitations or penalties on the deed restricted program, it doesn't turn it into a mandatory rent control that could then be deemed unlawful.
Ellen.
Yeah, I have a question of those. This was a program that's been in place for 2 to 3 years now. What percentage of units does that 37 units represent of those that have been developed? I think if we're going to determine whether or not it's been successful, we need to know what the percentage is of the whole.
Not many.
Ellen, like in recently developed?
Well, you said this has been in place since 2018, and we have about 37 units have been deed restrictions out of that population since 2018. So I'm curious what percentage, how many rental units have been developed within the city of Glenwood Springs during this period of time? So does this represent 2% of the units, 20% of the units? I mean, what's the percentage of units that we've resulted in having some deed restriction for employees within the zip code?
Jen. Jen, you're still muted.
Yeah, but I was talking to myself, so it was probably. I was just gonna do the how many do you say that we have in the program?
So there's
43,
26, 15, and then Gretchen said a couple more,
43 or 4.
43. And I know we had worked, we had those spreadsheets that showed all the units that were approved and coming online. And I know that's been a couple years, Jen, if that's what you're looking at.
So 43 is of the total units that have been developed recently. So that doesn't take out the for purchase product. That would take me one more minute because I don't have that in the spreadsheet. It would be 7.6%. So we've had 563, and there are a few that are in the pipeline, but I'm just counting them, but it's like the lofts and the ones that have come on recently is 563. And that does include like Bell Rippey that isn't built yet. So, and then if you give me another second, I think I can give you the number that's of the percentage of the for rent product. Just give me a second.
And Anna, does that prohibition mean that if we wish to, we couldn't say to a developer of a larger, so let's say a large unit apartment complex, we cannot mandate that some of them be in the deed restricted program?
Right. You can't require, you can offer incentives so that hopefully they'll participate on a voluntary basis. There was a bill in the works to try to repeal that. It looks like it failed. I think there have been efforts to try to get rid of that law for obvious reasons so that local governments have the ability to encourage affordable housing through more mandatory measures. But at this point, it's got to be voluntary or, through incentives.
So applying what Shelley said, if we want to reinstate inclusionary housing, we couldn't do it for rental property. It would have to only be for owner deeded property?
Right.
At all? Yeah, okay.
Okay, and that's not something that I was aware of. Yeah.
That's too bad.
It
Sounds
sounds
like
like
that tips it to be mandatory.
What's that?
What is the factor in something that tips it to be a mandatory requirement as opposed to an incentive? Is there?
Well, I mean, I think it's choice, right? Like the developer can choose to participate in the program in exchange for their participation. Maybe they can build more units or they get a waiver of fees, like we have. Mandatory is when they don't have a choice, when they're required to comply with certain rent control policies, and they're prohibited from increasing rent or setting whatever rent that they want.
Okay, but basically the point that I was getting is that if a developer wants to build 15 units, we can't say you have to set aside 3 units for this particular income population.
Right. You can't.
Right. Okay.
Currently.
Shelley.
Anna, can you do it in a way that it's tied to a bonus? Like, we'll let you build 2 extra units if they're deed restricted, or can you do it in that way or no?
I know lots of municipalities have figured workarounds. So, I mean, I think it could be, let me think of how to phrase that differently in a way that it would work. So,
and you don't have to answer it right now, but if
you can build more, I think that they would have to not have that right to build those other 2 units. So they're getting something that they're not otherwise entitled, or legally can have. So it really is an incentive, like a waiver of fees that they otherwise have to pay, or like we've talked about. I guess it would be kind of similar to a variance, like there's a cap on density, but if you agree to this program will let you build more than you would otherwise be legally able to build. That's what I think. I'd have to do some more research and see if other municipalities have done that. But again, that's the incentive that you're getting, either a waiver of fees or a waiver of some other restrictions or regulations that would apply that you don't have to comply with in exchange for agreeing to limit the rent.
So can we
I think there's ways we could do it. It just can't be flat out. You have to, allocate affordable units in your project.
Steve, back to you for a second. And in a way, it defeats, again, it sounds like to do this, there's a ton of compromises. If we had, say, a project like yours or larger, and it was, we had the fee waiver, which is voluntary, Anna, but we had it mandatory 30-year, which I see could be a disincentive in terms of recouping. But we came up, even though it defeats the affordability a little bit, if we came up with a sliding scale that said the first X number of years are 100% AMI, the next number of years are 105 or 110 or 120, we had a sliding scale that at least gets some lower cost housing, gets the incentives in, would that be some kind of palliative that might encourage somebody to go in if it was a 30-year lockup?
Was that question for me or for Steve?
No, it'd be more for Steve or others. Just thinking, right now we have a straight 100% and I guess cost living, but if that's a disincentive for anybody to do it, if we went to a longer lock-in period, if we paired it with some kind of sliding, increasing AMI scale, might that make it a little more palatable? I would ask both Marco and Steve who have either done it or tried it.
Sumner, I'm probably not the best one to answer that because I'm doing this because I like my employees being close to work, and I put other higher value in other things and not the economic return on the project. So if you can find someone like the hospital or someone that can view the value of the employees being in their town, that I think there's a lot of value there. But if not, if it's just driven by economics, it's going to be a tough sell.
They're not going to do it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Jen has her hand up, and then I'm going to put my hand up as well.
Since I'm the host, it doesn't give me a hand option. So I think my numbers are not perfect because it doesn't include some of those individual like ADUs so my number isn't perfect because it's more related to the numbers that I have on my list that are larger housing product, or the smallest one that's on here is 12 units and then 13 units. So my number isn't it's not perfect, but it was just over 8%. But again, I think to have a perfect number, I would need to make sure that this chart was including every housing unit that we have developed. So just wanted to give that caveat.
Yeah. No, that's very helpful. I think, something the Housing Commission might want to think about now that we see what that number is to see what, maybe talk to some of those developers to see what were the dollar amounts that made it attractive to them to participate. Did they have, what was their square footage cost? Did they get the $21,000? What is it that made it work for them that they went ahead and were willing to do the deed restriction? And are they in it for the long haul? And what was it that allows them to think about being in the long haul? Just when we're thinking about some of those partners that we wanted to talk with, it might be interesting to talk with some of the people right within Glenwood who chose to be involved in the deed restriction program.
And Ellen, just as background, I know I didn't mention this before in talking about the numbers. Obviously, of Steve's project.
Right.
The background of why he did it. And then our other largest property owner there that's involved in the project is the school district.
Oh, so that was the school districts involved in there. But I think that what Steve talks about is really important in terms of finding developers who are owners who are willing to look at other factors rather than just the bottom line. You know, I know from the hospital's point of view, doctors and other employees there have to live within a certain number, 20-minute drive to get to the hospital. You know, the doctors have to, when they are hired by the hospital, they have to be able to get to the hospital within 20 minutes. So there's some the transportation issue comes in as a big play there. How are they going to get in there? So there's other big incentives for those employers for having people live within the district. And so that's very helpful to hear that it's also the school and Steve and some other ones who, that's something that can influence who we think about reaching out to.
And I'm going to capitalize on a word that you just used there for a quick redirect: transportation. We do have Linda Dupriest and Terry Parch that are both on the line. And this was a request from some of our Housing Commission members that wanted some transportation and traffic representation in this discussion on housing, and really focused on, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, on the Housing Commission that you brought up, how much development can Glenwood Springs handle with our current infrastructure? And so without having to keep Linda and Terry on for the entire meeting, I'm going to take a quick redirect here and see, is that a question that's concerning to the commissions? Is there some questions that you want to ask or put to Linda and Terry regarding, the growth of Glenwood Springs and impacts to our current infrastructure?
Well, I was one of the people who I thought it would be helpful. And I do think that would be important for the issues for us to keep in mind, the transportation and infrastructure issues for us to keep in mind as we move forward to think about, development within the community.
Linda, do you want to take a first stab at that, or do you?
Well, first, I have to apologize for not being up on the affordable housing issue. I'm been at my job about 8 months now and haven't gotten around to that yet. So I intend to learn a whole lot more and can attend a future meeting with the same sort of topic if you'd like. I'm happy to do that. It's an exciting topic. But I'm wondering, Hannah and Gretchen and Jen, in the AMI calculation, is it a housing cost and transportation cost index? Is transportation indexed into that, or is it just the monthly mortgage or rent?
It is only the monthly rent. Transportation costs are not included.
Okay. Something to think about in some of the planning I've done for bicycle and pedestrian and transit. We often calculate also into the transportation costs for development. It sounds like some of the 81601 stuff you're doing would address that, and Steve's employees keeping them local. But certainly if you put a development, I live in the lofts, by the way, and I chose to live here and pay for luxuries I don't need because I'm close to City Hall. I also looked at Six Canyon, and it's on a street with no bike facilities or sidewalks, and it's a scary street to use alternative transportation on. So that development versus this one, the transportation costs figured in, location is really critical for what that's going to cost the person per month to live there. That's just a different way to calculate what the housing cost is, because if you're not factoring in what it's going to cost them to get to work, then that's only part of the picture. But I don't know if that's in your affordable housing code or what, and I will learn if it is. That's one comment. Terry, you might want to talk about the traffic forecast, which is not great.
Yeah, so broadly, does affordable housing have an effect on the transportation system? Absolutely. I think in two different ways, for instance, with the Bell Rippey project, it was, centered right above the BRT facility, which, is important and good because, we hope that those people will actually then take BRT to work instead of using their car. On the other hand, it is directly above 27th Street, which is one of our intersections that has a really low level of service. And so, drawing more people through that intersection really does affect that intersection in specific. So, it kind of opened the door to that conversation about Lake Gate. Can we, is it a good thing to have all of that traffic focused just at 27th Street, or should we try to shift it, to be at 27th Street and also maybe at the intersection of Blake, where it intersects State Highway 82. So every time we have a development, the location does matter, and how it interacts with our transportation system. The second thing I would say is that, with Southbridge and also with the MOVE study that we're working on right now, we're looking at 20-year projections of traffic on State Highway 82. And in general, those projections are looking at about an increase of about 20,000 vehicles in a 20-year time frame. So right now we are at about 27,000 vehicles a day across the Grand Avenue Bridge. They're projecting an increase to, about 46,000 vehicles a day. And so from a quality of life standpoint, today we feel like it's a little bit congested, or maybe it is congested in the PM peak hours. That impact is definitely, projected to grow. And so from the MOVE study standpoint, from the Transportation Commission standpoint, there's been a lot of discussion about how can we limit that? How can we reduce it? So I think that one of those ideas to reduce it is really affordable housing, trying to create, have people work in town as opposed to live west of the city and then have to either commute to Glenwood Springs or commute through. So I think affordable housing is one of those things that will really help us to preserve our quality of life overall. So in my mind, super important. But, then there are other things that we as a community need to be looking at. And, like Linda mentioned, where we choose to have affordable housing, how does it connect into our pedestrian and bike networks? Can you get on a bus? Can you ride your bike to work? All of those things are really important to the affordable housing discussion. So I think those are the 2 points I would make right now.
Sumner, please. You muted.
All right, a couple things that might be helpful, just that you've kind of triggered, and one old one. We generally, on planning and zoning, almost never, we see traffic studies, but we don't necessarily see recommendations. And Housing Commission, at some point, it might be helpful to have kind of a graded overlay that somehow you guys come up with. Take those factors you just talked about: cost, connectivity, impact on roads, congestion, impact on the infrastructure, let's say with construction projects that are planned, engineering, that if there were a number from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 that says, when you're considering transportation in this particular application, here's the transportation score. We've never had that I know of. That could be a helpful tool at some point, that you guys come up with the factors and you give us the score. And that's one thought. The second thought and it's hard with COVID, that's concerned me is you always have an issue of parking requirements and impervious surfaces and things like that. And we do create some incentive for reduced parking near transit areas. But I have yet to see, and I know with COVID it's very difficult, I have yet to see follow-up as to whether our numbers, for example, at the Lofts or at Canyon or down the road here at Bell Rippey, how much usage is there by those residents? Are they getting a free ride just by being near there? And not only that, how does it change seasonally? Again, those are inputs that your departments may help us, but I don't think we know the answers. And it's very puzzling when we're giving those incentives, whether it's working or not. And I know COVID time is not the best time to do it. So those are a couple thoughts. Thank you for being here.
Hannah, I'd like to respond to that as a resident of the lofts. You pay your rent here, you pay more for a storage closet, you pay a whole lot more for a garage, or you can get a carport. I didn't pay for any of that because I have an old car. I get free parking out on the street. And we've talked in our engineering group with Terry, reviewing the new lofts phase that's going in. And Terry will speak to this. Wanted them to redo their traffic projections because they were a lot more utopian than is the reality. So are those incentives actually incentivizing people to not drive? They do me. That's why I live here. So I can be near City Hall and the community center and this fantastic trail system out back. Does that work for everybody who lives here? I can't really say. I'm also, outside of just the transportation part, listening to Steve, and then Shelley brought up incentivizing multifamily developers to do cheaper rents within their bigger thing. These apartments are advertised as luxury. They're a lot fancier than I need, even as an old lady who likes my creature comforts. They take our trash out for us. There's all of these things that we get charged for that most of the young people who live here just want a place they can have a pet. It's more expensive than it needs to be for a lot of the market in this building. So I didn't know if there was maybe a market-driven incentive to make some units just cheaper for people for whom I'm paying $250 a square foot for a 750 square foot apartment. I do it to be near my work, but it's fancier than I need. That's off topic, so I'll let Terry weigh in on that.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think you guys have already used the words affordable versus attainable, and I think that those are important concepts. And affordable for some people is barely attainable. So I think that that's a common issue across our city, but something hopefully you guys are going to help us work on.
Excellent. And Shelley, please.
Hi, Linda. I had a question for you. When you were talking earlier about taking into account the transportation costs and kind of weighing that against, the rents and affordable housing. Do you ever see in that sector and working with transportation, that crossroads of transportation and housing, do you ever see them taking into account time? The time, if someone's commuting 3 hours a day, is that factored in somewhere? Is a dollar amount put to that, when you're trying to compare rents?
The planning projects I've worked on, one was a Tiger grant. That project's called Build Now. I worked on a Tiger grant in the Raleigh area of North Carolina. And we had to use a transportation / housing cost. It talked about the cost to commute from an hour away, but not the time. Maybe Gretchen and Jen and Hannah know of an index where time lost being stuck in traffic is also factored in. That would be really interesting. Terry might even know of one. I haven't worked with one of those indexes officially before where that's factored in, but should be.
Okay. I just wonder if anybody does that, because you think about the impact on a family if a parent or both parents are commuting 2 to 3 hours a day versus someone who can, get to work in 10 minutes.
It's possible the people, I wonder if the other planners on the meeting have heard of the walk score, which is, it was started by planners, but realtors use it a lot. And they actually, if you want to move into a certain neighborhood, you can put in the zip code or the even the census tract, and it gives you a score of how walkable that neighborhood is. Those folks might have the more complex model that we can look up. We could look into it. Sure, it'd be fun.
Great. To just a quick thought to piggyback on this transportation and people driving through town and all that. I'd be actually curious to know. Well, how should I word this? So if we build affordable housing or attainable housing, is it really people that work in Glenwood that are going to live here, or is it because of the 81601 that that's all we take because they work in that zip code? Is that how that's going to work, or is it going to be people that are just going to leave town and work 40 miles up the road to make more money and are closer to that goal? Because I don't remember seeing the zip code thing when I looked into the what's it called, D district fee waiver program. Did you tell me that?
Well, it's one of 5 criteria.
Yeah, it's and I included the section of code that it refers to. So to be a part of that program, you do sign the agreement that states you will only rent to a specific set of people, and there's the working within the 81601 or for a company that has a location, I think within 81601, and then we have students and those on Social Security, but that is a factor.
Okay, so I guess I wasn't quite clear about that. I didn't realize, but that makes a big difference. Sorry to cut the transportation. I didn't want to stop it, but I just had that thought, and somehow it in my mind said, okay, drive through or not drive through, or do we know out of those 27,000 cars how many stop here and how many keep going?
We don't have a recent, they call them an origin and destination study on the corridor. The most recent thing that has been done was done by RAFTA in 2016, and it wasn't very precise. But the data that I always use was from the corridor optimization study that was done by the city and the state. And the date on it was 2010, so somewhat out of date. But there was a 30-30-30 split, essentially. 30% of people were commuting through, and 30% of people were coming in and working in Glenwood Springs, and then 30% of Glenwood residents were then going up Valley. So that was a 2010 data point.
So that was a little while ago, and it may be still the same, or it may have changed. I could imagine that it would maybe change a little bit.
Yeah.
But sorry, Hannah, if I jump around a little bit, but to fall back on this deed restricted thing with a density bonus consideration. So if we allow the fee waiver, which is great, I think what we have in place is like 75% great. What Sumner said, no exit, I think is almost necessary. I don't want to shoo away any developer, but what if you get to waive your fees, but in order to get out, no, let's see, how did I word this in my head? In order to stay in the program, you get a density bonus on top of that. I'm just trying to combine as many incentives as we can do to get something going, because I hate to say it, I'll come back to my little fourplex, but I was building a duplex. I was hoping for an ADU on one side with a waiver program. And if something like that would have been in place, I would have easily signed up for 30 years if I could have built a fourth one. That's not a problem. That math-wise, for a fourplex, that would have worked out. So back to the zoning. We need to fix the zoning if we can't fix the variance criteria. And this is getting a little too technical here, but and the planning and zoning knows that I harp about the variance criteria. And Jen, yes, I hear you. If we can't fix the variance, we need to fix the zoning. So there you go. We need to fix the zoning. So with a fee waiver program and a density bonus and adjusted zoning, maybe we get some units, and not everybody downtown is going to do this. It's going to be just a few units because not everybody has the land, not everybody has the money, not everybody wants to do this. So it's not like it's going to be peppered all over town, but specific little areas could benefit from this kind of thing.
Well, it might be peppered, Marco. Everybody's focusing on downtown, which is already pretty dense. But one of Hannah's questions is, how many zoning districts do we consider for different types of housing? And part of the comp plan is spread them out all over town. Increase the diversity of housing units. Maybe we should be looking south of town. Maybe we should be looking in the Polo area and West Glenwood, where there are actually larger lots, to say, hey, yeah, you can put townhomes and you can put fourplexes and you can put new different units in there as well, with whatever incentives, instead of just focusing downtown as well. And that's part of Hannah's question and part of the question for us.
Right, and I agree, but my point was with the downtown is if you got to work in 81601 and you live downtown, well, there's a good chance you can walk comfortably to where you're going. If you live somewhere west or south and you work downtown or whatever, you might not want to walk. You may ride your bike, but that's the transportation thing. You know,
that's true, but then that's why we want move and ride.
Right. We want a lot of things. So I'm just, thinking out loud that a fee waiver is great, but it could be better, especially if you stay in it for 30 years, get an extra unit. And we've talked about height bonus and all that, and it works in some areas, but I'm not a huge fan of that. But anyway, Paula, please.
I haven't really heard us discussing doing what basically Steve's doing, offering incentives to businesses to start incorporating a second level with housing on it, with density and that type of thing that they could. When you mentioned South Glenwood, it just kind of made me think of the Roaring Fork Marketplace, and we have all these empty, American Furniture's gone and Office Depot is gone. But if a realtor or somebody who bought that, if they had an opportunity to say, look, you can also build a second level with density. We haven't really tied this, or Shelley has talked in the past, if we did something with the mall that was business and residential, and is there a way that we can inspire?
Well, one of the big factors, Paula, that comes up with this is that term, I hadn't seen it, commercial linking. And if I understand Anna correctly, we're not controlling the rents, but we could mandate that if you have new or redeveloped commercial, you have to add residential. I believe that's what the commercial linking is it not, Hannah? And that doesn't mandate rent control, Anna. It's just a zoning requirement.
Sure, Sumner, we do. Yeah, commercial linkage is definitely mentioned in the strategic housing. I'm going to pause and try and get some equitable talking time here. I see that Ellen has had her hand up for some time, and then so we're going to go there, and Sumner will circle back to that.
I had a question for Terry and for Linda. That was a concern we have, and it grows out of something that Marco had mentioned. I mean, there's an assumption that if you build the housing in the downtown area, people can walk to work. Well, there's a lot of employers, not just in that downtown area. And then you also have one of one of the parcels that we had been thinking about looking for, the city had said might be available to us, is off of Midland towards the airport. There's no buses out there. And so I was curious, in terms of a transportation plan, is there discussion about putting large buses, small buses to some of those corners of the city, where to encourage people to be more access to the buses that go up 82 and some of the, other areas within the city? What is it? How do we, if we're going to have some affordable units and we want people not to be just driving all over, what's the transportation plan that's being developed in terms of bus offering into some of those other corners of the city?
Terry, do you want to give some history on the on-demand study and why we did that and what we might do with it in the future?
Sure.
That was before me.
Yeah. So I guess it was 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago now. We did do a new transit operations plan. And the idea behind the transit operations plan was to see if we could take the existing transit dollars that we have and better use them, use them for some of our areas that are a little bit less, served on the north side or on the south side. And so we did, consult with a company that does, they call it on-demand transit, where they use smaller vehicles and they come in with a ride hailing system is what they called it. Some sort of a computerized system where, people can call for a ride. And instead of trying to walk to a traditional bus stop, they walk, a block or maybe 2 blocks, and they pick up another smaller vehicle. And the system kind of optimizes itself over time, by the same people calling for rides over time. And they, it's kind of calculating if, they have a number of people in the same area, they're sending a vehicle out to that area. So it sounded like a really great idea. We did put, some budget into the 2020 budget to do a pilot study. But when we started talking to the company about a pilot study, they said, you really need to have a year-long study to really make it effective and to really decide whether it would work for your community. And it was just outside of, what we had the budget to be able to do. I do think we'll pick it back up. I would also add that, the MOVE study that we're working on right now with RAFTA, it's got a bunch of different components to it. One is the BRT. RAFTA would really like to figure out a way to get BRT from 27th Street all the way out to the west. And with that, they would have more, at least a couple, maybe 3 different stops in town between, the West Glenwood station and 27th Street to kind of move people between that on that BRT system. But in conjunction with the BRT, they wanted to look at re-optimizing both they call it the Valley Local Service, that comes right down Glenwood or right down Grand Avenue, as well as our Ride Glenwood Springs service. And so they've got some preliminary ideas about moving Ride Glenwood Springs out to the north side. And, we haven't analyzed it yet. We've been really focused on the BRT system. I can't remember if there was a Southern Loop to their initial proposal. But we are working on those ideas of trying to move, transit services out to less served areas, as well as, trying to make good bike connections. The South Bridge project that I'm working on right now has 2, it's either 6-foot wide or 8-foot wide sidewalks on both sides, all the way from South Glenwood out to State Highway 82, where it would connect in with the Rio Grande. So anything that was on that far south end would have riding access to the Rio Grande. So those are some of our bigger efforts right now.
To elaborate on that, the MOVE study is going to look at a service redundancy that exists between Ride Glenwood and the Raftus Valley Local along 82 corridor. Both of our bus systems go up and down that road, and we both have 30-minute headways. When they come down Valley, it's always late. So our customers that want to get somewhere on time use our bus on that corridor because RAFTA isn't as dependable. That's a problem that us and RAFTA should be working out together so that we're not duplicating that route. It's a waste of money. It doesn't make sense. And that's going to be looked at in the MOVE study. But we could take some of those, if it turns out that Ride Glenwood shouldn't be on that corridor, we can take that money and be flexible with, if there's an affordable housing project where you'd like to have a bus, some of these service efficiencies could help us find that money to do that. And there's two things. RAFTA, right before COVID hit, we had been involved with them with creating a very, very detailed onboard survey to find out anybody who got on Ride Glenwood or a RAFTA bus, where were they going every day? What were they using it for? That got called off, obviously, with COVID. But there's also wonderful technology that any bus system can purchase where we can get that data and figure out just very, very details about everybody who's using a bus, where they're going, when they get off, when they get on. And RAFTA hasn't deployed that kind of high-level technology yet, neither have we, but we should be looking at that so that we have that data just to start with, and then we can pivot with it if we get an affordable housing development or various projects for that.
Excellent, great. Steve, you got your hand up.
I think I already talked, sorry.
Thank you, no problem. Ellen, are you good? Did you have all your questions answered? Excellent. Hannah, any more?
Steve, I just lowered your hand, but then I saw it go back up. So are you done? Oh, there we go. Okay. So thank you, Linda and Terry, for that conversation. Obviously, transportation is extremely important when we talk about housing for all of the reasons that you guys have brought up. We are closing in on 8 o'clock. This was scheduled for 8:30, so I'm just gonna bring that up because I'm very stickler for ending on time. And obviously, this topic can go on forever. But I think as we try and close this out so that we feel that we've been productive and gotten somewhere, I have some questions. We talked about the deed restricted fee waiver program a little bit. Inclusionary housing was also one of these topics. And I know I myself was also saddened to hear from Anna. Thank you for that update that the rental aspect of inclusionary housing did not pass. I was unaware of that also. And then we have the conversation that we had almost a year ago today, is the density bonus kind of on the table. And that was requested to be brought back by several members on Housing Commission, Planning and Zoning Commission, and City Council. So last time we talked about density bonus for several hours and didn't come to a conclusion. So it really is a question, and I included the presentation from last time, last year's density bonus and ADU conversation. So really the question is a density bonus something that we want to task Housing Commission and staff to bring forward with recommendations? And I can, obviously we've got some new members on the boards from the last time we spoke. But I'm trying to wrap this up in 30 minutes and it's probably not going to happen, but let's have those conversations of what actionable items we want to take away from here as far as policy goes, and who's going to pick up the reins there if we want to throw this to Housing Commission to come up with a recommendation to staff to then come back to Planning and Zoning, or what we want to take away with moving forward steps. Thoughts? I didn't just mute you all, did I? Paula.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Shelley, I saw your hand.
Yeah. So for me, I appreciate the fact that you're going to discuss density. I really think it has to be tied to affordable housing, attainable housing. Just not density, because I think we have been approving density and giving variances and all of that, and it's not solving this problem if we don't put that into there. That's just my personal feeling on it. So I'm just taking it from there.
I think it may cut across all those things, Paula. Am I frozen?
I can
Y'all
hear you.
hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd say I'd open that door a little bit to say we need to consider density bonus, but maybe not just, but in some cases combined with fee waivers and affordable housing. But also we've identified needs for senior housing. We've identified needs for other family housing. Those could also be incented with density and also the commercial linking. Those can also be incented by changing or creating density bonuses in certain areas. So I think, yes, Marco's example of tying it to affordable housing is key, but I wouldn't rule out other bonuses for other types of housing as well.
I got something to throw in about density bonus. Should we allow a second ADU on single family lots? And I'm mainly referring to, okay, so I got a basement that I could rent out, that I could turn into an ADU, and I have room in the backyard to build a small one. Should that be allowed if one of them is affordable housing or entered into that, even a fee waiver program for 30 years? Just something to discuss, whether it's housing or us later, but I think that's something to think about, in my opinion. Steve, please.
So another thing, I've been fortunate to use two of your programs in the past. One was the affordable housing, the 81601 program, but also we used Janet's economic development program, where we got back 80% of our development costs, as far as the fees and stuff that we had to do in a commercial project through rebates on our sales tax. So if there's a way to tie in the commercial properties, that if they could, build housing and get rebates back on half of their sales tax or something like that, there might be some incentive for commercial people. Maybe there's a way to tie that together, is all I'm saying.
Thank you. And Carolyn?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the beginning of this meeting, Sumner kind of identified four major things that could be dealt with. I am very concerned about how easy it is to get out of the deed restriction program. I would like to have a look at that. I'm very, very in favor of density bonuses involving things like lot sizes and increased heights. I think the density bonuses really do tie in with another ADU. I mean, if you've got like I do, I have a 2-story original family house. The top floor is now an apartment, and I've got plenty of room in the backyard to build another unit, but at this time I'm not allowed. I mean, I would love to, and I would like for that also to maybe not have to be the minimum 300 square feet. So I'd like to see maybe a little more flexibility on minimum ADU size. We did come up with at least 49 as opposed to 50 square feet, but I'm not giving up my basement. allowing residential in all the zone districts isn't something that we totally touched on here, but I think that one of the things identified was the work-live scenario where you could have a shop. I mean, if you were an artist or a fabricator of some sort, kind of like we see just outside city limits past Rosebud Cemetery. There's some housing and industrial mixes. And then, I mean, if you can purchase a place, you've got your business and your shop right there. Brings me back to one of the 81601 incentives, is that why wouldn't someone just open up a PO box in Glenwood Springs so that their employees would qualify for this 81601? There's not a whole lot of like business presence. Say if you had a construction company, you could have your office here, but your employees don't work here. So they're still commuting up Valley. So I think in light of the other transportation conversation, it would be good to look at transportation time and costs when we factor in how much people are paying for their housing. And I know that has been done in a lot of jurisdictions. And the last note I just made was based on what Steve Beckley said. I think we do have a housing commission, and the objectives from the 2010 RERC was sort of suggesting there should be a commission with a little more power to help people figure out what grants and incentives they might be eligible for. I mean, we shouldn't all go pestering Steve Beckley to find out all the things he's learned, but in terms of developers coming to our town, like how can we help them want to spend their money here? How can we help them see what incentives there are? Maybe it shouldn't all fall on city staff's shoulders. Ideally, there would be another person who could sort of help with that, but there could be, I don't know, a leaflet or a website with different grants and things to try to attract developers who are eager and willing to at least contribute part of their housing resources towards workforce housing. But in general, I feel like this has been an extremely beneficial conversation. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Anybody else? Ellen, please.
Yeah, one thing that I would like to recommend that I've been thinking about is, and I'm sure Catherine, has experience with this, is which communities in that have had the density bonus, the restrictions, what's the sweet spot for timeframes? Some of you may not know, I was an attorney for HUD, with HUD for 37 years before I retired. And we had a variety of programs that had different lengths of time where housing owners had restrictions of various things. Some of those were 12-year periods, some were 30-year periods, some were longer periods. Some of those timeframes worked very well in terms of encouraging and maintaining the affordability of the housing, and some programs did not. And so I think before we just pick a time frame, I think that there are some things we can do that will be very good, but that I think we do need to do some research and exploration to figure out for which program, what type of time frame may work best and not tie us in too long or too short. And the other thing that caught my attention that I think Hannah had mentioned earlier in terms of a penalty, for what's going on right now, I do think you can see some of the, if there's just a short-term requirement for the deed restrictions, I can see why people would think of it as a good short-term loan that they can get out of it, and all they have to do is repay the amount of money that they say the $21,000 they got, rather than having to have a pretty, hefty interest loan on that money. If you had, after 3 years, you want to get out of it because the rates of housing have gone up considerably, they should be having to pay a substantial interest amount. Things like that. I just think that we need to do some more research to see what works well and what doesn't work. but along the lines to come up with something that would be substantial incentive. But I do feel like some further research is needed on some of these issues.
Excellent, thank you. Anybody else?
Marco,
Shelley, please.
and I apologize. I need to get off now. Sorry about that, but I just wanted to say thank you to all of you that are here tonight and that serve on these commissions. This has been a really fruitful conversation. I think a lot of interesting topics and great ideas discussed. So I'd love to see some things move forward. And, you know, a great example of you two working together is the revisions to the ADU code that we were able to pass and the zoning codes, just to kind of loosen up the ADU requirements a little bit. And that went through fairly quickly. Council approved it and it's on the books. So I really appreciate the work you guys are doing, and we'll see what comes out of this. So thank you.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thanks.
Thanks. Sumner, please. You muted.
Time is running out and I'm getting kind of itchy for an action to this great meeting. I would make a suggestion, besides Hannah's questions for discussion, I would suggest that I propose that all of us in this meeting take a look at the recreational economic plan and just take a look at actions 21, 22, 31, 32, 33. Those cover everything we've discussed today. Within each of those categories, we can each plug in our own reactions, whether it be deed restriction, whether it be bonuses, whether it be other incentives. I would suggest that we write up under those categories our reactions to this meeting and then route them to Hannah. But Hannah, maybe you don't want to consolidate all of them. I'd volunteer, or a couple of us to volunteer to consolidate these statements. And from that point, we can split it off. Say, hey, planning and zoning ought to take these and the commission ought to take these. And at least we might have some actionable items that we can proceed on right away under these categories and not dissipate the energy that happened tonight. So that would be my suggestion.
I think that sounds great. Hannah, would you be able to formulate an email to everybody, even the people that maybe weren't present tonight, but also are still part of the commissions, and have us answer what Sumner's is asking us to do? I think that'd be great.
I think that sounds like something feasible. I want to make sure I fall within the lines of legality for communication. So we would send this out, it would come back to me, and then Anna and Jen. I could then forward, if we have volunteers to do the consolidating. It's okay for then me to forward those to other members for consolidation. Am I explaining that correctly?
I would think so. And then that whoever that compilation came from would then go back to staff, and then it could be disseminated again.
Or we could meet again and go over it.
Love your meetings, Marco. Paula has her hand up while Anna is contemplating.
I think so.
Could we also, Jen, maybe this is a question for you, but that's what RERC is looking for. Can we go ahead and incorporate those ideas once they're approved and everybody's good with it, that these are action steps that are going to be taken?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can. I have to look again at what we decided on the timeline. I know that was this morning, but it seems like so long ago.
Just something to think. Yeah, as I said, as that question came up at the beginning of this meeting, that's what they're looking for, is what are the next actionable steps. So thank you, Sumner. That's awesome. That's great.
I will refresh my memory and share that with Hannah. Actually, Hannah may have it too, of when we're supposed to have that feedback back.
Okay.
And Sumner, to help me out, if you could just shoot me a quick email with that specific request and what you're talking about. I know where you're talking about, but just a little bit of the direction of what you're wanting people to comment on, opinions, or
Sure.
just a little bit of clarity there.
I will do
That'd be great.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Any great ideas? It's only 8:16, Hannah. It's only 8:16.
So one thing that, we've brought this back a couple times since we've got some minutes here. As far as actionable items, and I know we're going to work on this other piece. Do you guys want to see staff come back with recommendations on the deed restricted fee waiver program? Or let's just leave that question. How about I get a show of hands? Who on these commissions wants to see the deed restricted program have some alterations or have a thorough review in front of you guys?
I also think part of
And
this,
keep them for a second.
part of this exercise will give you some input as well, Hannah.
Okay, I'm seeing a majority of the hands there go up. So that was an answer that I wanted to get. And Sumner, I'm sorry, what was that last comment?
Sorry,
So I think the exercise, the follow-up I'm proposing would also give you feedback along those lines, I think, based on what we're going to get to you.
I agree. So I think those comments will also inform on the density bonus side of things as well. So once we get those comments back and consolidate them, I suppose if we see an overwhelming comments on the density bonus side, that will give us direction. Is that what we're hoping for, Sumner, as well?
Yeah, I believe so. I think we're going to get, and I'll put it in the email as to how to, maybe some parameters, how to frame this. But yeah, we should be able to come up with reasonable consensus for certain actionable items. Density bonus and would be one. The fee waiver would be another. There are so many other things we've mentioned today that may come up, and we can identify a couple actionable items, and P&Z can run with those that relate to code, perhaps, and Housing Commission can relate and run with others.
I would also say in that effort, now you have the RERC, but you also have kind of a condensed comprehensive plan and the strategic housing plan. So you can refer to those documents as well if you have questions on specific policies that have been discussed in the past, or as the mayor has mentioned, go wild with your ideas and come up with something entirely new. He did encourage that. So
more than once. So yes. So would you think that there is some items for this that are, I guess they could be separated for the Housing Commission and Planning and Zoning? I would think, yes. Or if the Housing Commission fine tunes it, does the P&Z still see it?
I would hope
this work.
I would hope that the communication continues between both commissions.
Okay.
I think most of these items are going to require P&Z have their eyes on it.
Okay, I think that's all good. Yeah.
Hannah, just to clarify, like if there are code revisions, obviously there's a required public hearing at P&Z and then a recommendation to City Council and then a first and second reading of an ordinance that would amend the code. So maybe not everything will require that, but some will.
Yes, thank you for that clarification, Jen. Process, always important.
We need to know the process. Excellent. So any final thoughts? Any comments? Anything, Hannah, anything additional? No?
We have amazingly, I see Carolyn throwing her fingers up. So
go
ahead.
Sorry, I didn't see that.
I mostly just want to say, I feel like we have made some progress. It doesn't appear as though we need any more lengthy reports. And we better get down to business and just put some actions item on some people's lists. But I feel like this has been very, very productive.
Thank you, Carolyn, and I agree. It's time to make the donuts, as they say, and I think we need to. I'm glad Sumner brought that up. That we need to move forward. So, any other comments? Anything? No? Should we call it a night? I'm okay with it. Okay, great. Well, thank you everybody for showing up, and have a wonderful evening, and till next time.
Thank you.
Meeting is adjourned.